Hello, everyone. My name is Bill Weisenbach. I'm a trustee at New York Theological Seminary, and I want to tell you just a bit of the history about New York Theological Seminary from its founding. And then when I joined the staff, and when I went as a student in 1966 and joined the staff and stayed on until 1993. In order to understand how the New York Seminary came to be, you need to know something about Wilbur Webster White, its founder, who was awarded a PhD from Yale University in 1891 under the apprenticeship of William Rainey Harper, who himself was a brilliant semanticist and wrote any number of books on studying biblical languages inductively. That's an important word in the future of the seminary, inductive. White got an Old Testament degree from Yale under Harper. Harper then just incidentally went on at the invitation of Rockefeller in 1891 to found the University of Chicago and was its first president for 15 years, and tragically died at the age of 49 while there in Chicago. The other thing that came to happen was White's distress over the old school, new school debates of the 19th century. With the old school, Princeton Seminary's Hodge and Warfield claiming the Bible to be inerrant, and that the Westminster Confessions to be a summary of what the Bible had to say. And the later development, or actually earlier development, of higher criticism in Germany that was making its way to the US, claiming the Bible was filled with errors. The leader amongst those modernist higher criticism experts was a fellow named Briggs at Union Seminary. While White faulted both schools for failure to read the Bible for what it was and began to develop this Bible study method with the inductive method at its heart. Part of his inspiration for that, in addition to the work he did with Harper, was the famous biologist Louis Agassiz, who was known for his regime of observational data gathering and analysis. Every student at New York Seminary had to read the famous biologist on the usefulness of learning through observation. The title of the little pamphlet that we all had to read was Louis Agassiz and the Fish. And it's just a simple story of a graduate student of Agassiz in biology who's told to tell Agassiz what he sees. What's in front of him, of course, is a sunfish. He says it's a sunfish, and Agassiz says, oh, there's much more. And for hours, he spends time observing this fish and writing down everything he observes. And Agassiz kept coming by each day, leaning over his shoulder and saying, oh, there's much more. And it was for 10 hours a day for an entire week before Agassiz finally looked over his shoulder and said, ah, astonishing. And he discovered all kinds of interesting things about the fish. Well, that was the theory that was to be applied to the study of the Bible. So here is White with this passion for an inductive methods of study and a real disappointment at the way theology was being produced. At this point in his life, having finished his PhD, he was a professor at Xenia Seminary in Ohio, and then the number 2 person at Moody Bible Institute in Chicago. I gather he didn't feel any of these were meeting quite the need he wanted. So in 1900, he founded the Bible Teachers Training College in Montclair, New Jersey. The first class graduated in 1901, and also counter to much of what was going on in the world, contained women on the faculty and in the student body. That was reflected, that and has always been reflected in the long history of the seminary. In 1902, The school moved to New York City and for a brief time changed its name to the Bible Teachers Training Institute because New York State would not permit it to call itself a college as it was not certified or accredited. Eventually, it bought a building on 49th Street and Lexington Avenue and thrived there, received accreditation, renamed itself the Biblical Seminary in New York, and it offers Bachelor of Divinity degrees, Master of Religious Education, Masters of Systematic Theology, and doctorates in Systematic Theology, and sent missionaries and Bible teachers and professors throughout the world to teach Bible in its history. It came to the point in 1927 that it needed more space. And so the seminary built a new 11-story building at 235 East 49th Street between 2nd and 3rd, largely funded by a lease of their Lexington Avenue property, which was subsequently demolished and turned into a gigantic new hotel, but not the Waldorf. In 1929, trouble began, but by the early 30s, the hotel was unable to pay the lease obligations, and the property, and therefore its lease, was lost to the banks. The school forged on, but the emotional toll eventually affected Dr. White, and in 1938, he was removed from office, an embittered man. A series of interim presidents, including Wilbert Webster White's brother, then served until 1946, which brings in another hero of the seminary's history, Dr. Dean McKee, the son of an Iowa farmer, enrolled as a student at Biblical Seminary in 1925 after a friend persuaded him to consider the ministry. He'd already received a bachelor's degree from Parsons College as a mathematics major, and he went on to get 3 degrees in sacred theology, including his doctorate from the seminary. He became a member of the faculty in 1928, teaching New Testament Greek and history. McKee was ordained a Presbyterian minister in 1930 and named dean of the seminary in 1941. He then served as president from 1946 to 1960 and left the seminary eventually in semi-retirement to be a professor of biblical exposition at Columbia Seminary in Decatur, Georgia. He would make visits back to the city and talk to alumni groups about his days of, particularly of financial struggle with the seminary, because all their real, what they thought would be a 99-year endowment was lost in the crash. And about all the nights when a bank loan of $75,000 or $150,000 was due, and all the students and faculty would gather and pray. And every time they did it, someone would come up with the money, a $25,000 gift here, a $5,000 gift there, and every one of their obligations was met. Which reminds me, I should have said earlier, White also was a person of prayer. He often said, prayer works, prayer is work, and prayer leads to work. He also gave a biblical motto to the seminary, a vision statement that came from 2 Chronicles 16:9. For the eyes of the Lord run to and fro throughout the whole earth to show itself strong in the behalf of them whose hearts are perfect toward him. When I arrived there in 1966, that was still the visionary text of the seminary. In 1960, as I said, McKee stepped down, and there were a series of interim presidents or acting presidents, some from the board of the seminary. But in 1966, John Sutherland Bennell, who was a board member, decided to retire as the senior pastor of Fifth Avenue Presbyterian Church. And Bennell came with at least a reputation of being able to raise money and a passion for pastoral care and counseling, and hired two professors, John Kildall and Ron Soderquist, to create continuing education programs, STM level programs in pastoral care and counseling in connection with the Postgraduate Center for Mental Health. And Niall Harper, already a member of the faculty, was charged with doing the same in urban ministry, his effort to both increase the size of the student body and to provide important educational resources for clergy in the city. The increase of students was significant, but the BD and MRE programs remained very undersubscribed. Incidentally, at a point in time there, I think it was 1969 or 70, in 1970, I believe, the ATS changed the nomenclature BD to MDiv, recognizing that it really was well beyond a college degree. Now, I need to say something about the seminary building that that was built to accommodate which in 1927 were largely single students. There were nearly 100 cell-like bedrooms, 20 per floor, divided into men's and women's floors. But by the late 40s, there were fewer and fewer single people applying, and many of the rooms were converted to offices. Eventually, the other spaces were rented to interested nonprofit groups like Bread for the World, which began in the building, as did the Environmental Action Coalition and the Metropolitan Urban Service Training, just to name a few. At the end of Bunnell's 3-year contract, he notified the board that he was going to step down. And as I mentioned, Metropolitan Urban Service Training, Bill Weber, Dr. George Williams Weber, a faculty member at Union Theological Seminary, one of the founders of the East Harlem Protestant Parish, was asked to co-direct with Randy Nugent the Metropolitan Urban Service Training Program, and they housed themselves at New York Seminary. So all of a sudden, there was this very well-funded urban training center on the 12th floor of the seminary, and Bill Weber became rather well known in the building. So when Bunnell notified the board that he intended to step down at the end of June of 1969, they immediately began to search for a new president, and many of the faculty and many of the students thought that Weber would make a great president. Unfortunately, John Sutherland Bunnell opposed Weber, and when Weber was finally chosen, he resigned rather precipitously. And Weber willingly became president in March of 1969, just in time to sign my own Bachelor of Divinity diploma. And then, since I was going to stay on for an STM at the Postgraduate Center, Weber offered me a job as his assistant, which I took. Weber made one condition of his coming. He said the school would go all out in recruitment, faculty, curriculum, and expense to see if something new could emerge. But if not, the school would drop the first professional degree, that is the MDiv by then, MDiv and MRE. All the faculty would agree to resign, and the school would dedicate itself only to continuing education. Well, I was around then, and it was a heck of a year with a lot of energy, but nothing really new came of it. And at the end of that year, the faculty did indeed all resign, and the school committed itself to continuing education, but in 3 separate areas. 2 of those faculty who had been hired during Weber's 1 year were Willis Elliott and Melvin Schoonover. Each of those 2 would be responsible for one of 3 foci. Mel Schoonover would be responsible for the master's programs for clergy, leading to an STM degree. Willis Elliott would develop programs for hungry laypersons who wanted to do serious theological study, but who wanted to continue as lay programs. And Robert Washington was hired to lead certificate programs for ministers lacking the necessary academic credentials for a degree program, but were hungry for training. So there were three rings: laity, continuing education, and certificate. Once again, the seminary was prospering. New certificate programs in Spanish were offered, and a new DMIN program was being developed, and extensions of the STM program were developed in New Jersey and Maine and England, lots of places. In 1971, I finished the postgraduate center, and I was invited to join the faculty, and a new passage of scripture emerged as central to the seminary's mission. It was Jeremiah 29:7. But seek the welfare of the city where I have sent you into exile, and pray to the Lord on its behalf, for in its welfare you will find your welfare. That mission statement was taken very seriously. Certificate students were being graduated and would ask, what's next for them? Well, they couldn't go into an STM. We didn't have an MDiv, and they didn't have a college degree. So the answer was college. Get a college program that could be developed using the seminary space, marketed to those certificate graduates, and offered on a timeline that was convenient to those people. Hostess Community College was first to accept the challenge. Empire State College did so later. And finally, the College of New Rochelle picked up the mantle, and all of them would give advanced standing for graduates of the certificate program. And then it happened again. Once again, the college graduates came and asked, what's next? The seminary no longer offers an MDiv. What can we do? We decided we were obliged to find out how to get these people an MDiv degree. And we went into a joint program with New Brunswick Theological Seminary in New Jersey. The program would be offered in the seminary space, and a third of the teaching would be done by NYTS faculty, and 2/3, all the core courses, taught by New Brunswick theological faculty, who would come up and teach them in the seminary in the evenings, just as is done now. This program also thrived. And there came a point in time when we decided there needed to be a joint dean for this program. Our only requirement from NYTS's point of view was that that new dean be a person of significant theological stature. The New Brunswick faculty had a young man on their faculty that they wanted to promote to this position, and we emphatically disagreed. Sadly, in those discussions, they said it would be their person or the program wouldn't go forward. And Bill Weber and then President-elect Keith Russell and Emily Gibbs and I walked out of that meeting and stood in front of the Harvard Club, where the president of New Brunswick was a member and hosted the luncheon, said, we can do this ourselves. And we hired Gayrod Wilmore, the well-known African-American church historian, to be the founding dean of that program. And it worked. We got slowly recovered and got reaccredited to offer an MDiv, and have done so ever since. And during that period emerged yet another passage of scripture which kind of shaped the way programs from that point would move forward. It was Ephesians 4. I, therefore, a prisoner of the Lord, urge you to walk in a manner worthy of the calling to which you have been called, with all humility and gentleness, with patience, bearing with one another in love, eager to maintain the unity of the Spirit in the bonds of peace. There is one body and one Spirit, just as you were called to the one hope that belongs to your call, one Lord, one faith, one baptism, one God and Father of all, who's above all and through all and in all. And he gave the apostles, the prophets, the evangelists, the shepherds, and teachers to equip the saints for the work of ministry, for building the body of Christ, until we all attain to the unity of the faith and of the knowledge of the Son of God, to mature personhood, to the measure of the stature of the fullness of Christ, so that we may no longer be children tossed to and fro, there's that word fro again, by the waves and carried about by every wind of doctrine, by human cunning, by craftiness and deceitful schemes. Rather, speaking the truth in love, we are to grow up in every way unto him who is the head, from whom all the whole body joined and together in every joint with which it is equipped, when each part is working properly, makes the body grow so that it builds up in love. It wasn't long after that, in 1983, that the seminary discovered a burning need for a graduate program in a prison. And the one at Sing Sing was born. It continues to this day. DMin programs taught in Spanish and in Korean were created and to this day are operated whenever the need occurs. What else did I want to tell you? I think that's probably, the translation of the Bible, the Message, was done by Eugene Peterson. Eugene Peterson is a graduate of Biblical Seminary in New York. And he learned his biblical languages there and became a master of the inductive method, which I think helped him to be able to put those ancient languages into such delightful modern translation. Pat Robertson is also a graduate of the seminary. And there's a funny story about him. You know, he was a Yale lawyer, and he came to the seminary living on Staten Island and got convicted one day by the passage to say, sell all that you have and give it to the poor. And he went home and sold the house and gave all the money away without even checking with his wife. Well, he claims that was the best thing he ever did. And I suppose, given his success as a fundamentalist, others might think so. But anyway, he is still in correspondence with the seminary and did ask to have his BD returned and got an MDiv diploma, which he still proudly hangs on his wall. Everything, all the rest of the history, other people have written or reflected on. And I hope you found this interesting, and thank you very much.
Thank you.
I have a feeling that was much longer